A new wave of Ostalgie could force Berlin into a new Ostpolitik. The elections to the European Parliament in Germany on June 9th not only polarized positions on the proxy war in Ukraine, with the victory of the hyper-Atlanticist CDU-CSU on the one hand, and the strong growth of the anti-war forces around the AfD and BSW on the other, but also showed that the biggest political divide in the country is between East and West, i.e., between the former states of the German Democratic Republic and the Federal Republic of Germany. Why, 34 years after the fall of the GDR, is this not only noticeable, but seems to be gaining in strength? Perhaps because the reunification of Germany was not really a reunification, but rather an annexation of the GDR into the structures of the Federal Republic of Germany. This was in line with Bonn's plans for, open quote, geopolitical compromise implicit in the Maastricht Treaty, whereby Europe gave Germany the green light for rapid reunification in exchange for the Europeanization of the Deutsche Mark, end quote. These are the words of former Italian Foreign Minister Gianni Di Michelis, who led his country's negotiations of the 1992 Treaty on European Union, which established the European Central Bank and the foundations of the single currency. According to him, it was a kind of rebranding and adaptation of the German currency to a new scale of a Europe that would expand eastwards. Open quote, the real negotiations took place in absolute secrecy. German reunification would not have been possible without Europe's consent, end quote. Thus, it took half a year to admit the GDR with its 16 million inhabitants, which had emerged from a dictatorship and had an economy that didn't meet European Economic Community criteria, while the applications of Spain and Portugal, already democracies, had to be adapted to the strict economic parameters of the EEC before they were approved after 7 years. In 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski stated in Foreign Affairs that, open quote, any expansion of Europe's political space is automatically an expansion of US influence. An enlarged Europe will extend the reach of US influence without at the same time creating a Europe politically integrated enough to challenge the US on issues of geopolitical importance, end quote. This was the former US National Security Advisor's honest description of the EU's instrumental role in Washington's strategic expansion on European soil. Thus, the GDR and many of its genuinely Germanic structures from the former Prussia were absorbed and eliminated in a Federal Republic of Germany dominated by Frankfurt school education, consumerism, mass immigration, and Americanized culture. Over the years, this has led to low-intensity reaction movements around the idea of Ostalgie, a play of words to describe nostalgia for the East, with a collective identity that has characterized the entire former GDR, including East Berlin. Curiously, this is where anti-war sentiment is currently strongest, following an institutional trend in Hungary, Slovakia, and Serbia, but also among large sections of the population in the Czech Republic, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Austria. This contradicts the Western narrative, which insists on the truism that the countries of the Eastern Europe have great resentment against Russia. Coincidentally, it is also in Eastern Germany that there is the strongest reaction against the multicultural model imposed by the EU-NATO, visible in the anti-immigration vote of the AfD and also of a new left that is now emerging in the form of the BSW, with which it has some points in common. It was also here that the major demonstrations against the refugee crisis of 2016 took place. Later, with the COVID-19 crisis, it was also in the East that the first large demonstrations against governmental measures took place. More recently, farmers' protests have included GDR flags, less a sign of separatism than a clear symbol that not everything was so bad in the old days. A survey by Infratest DMAP, a polling institute specializing in political opinion and electoral studies, published 6 months after the start of the Russian operation in Ukraine, shows that on same issues related to Russia and the United States, the responses are significantly different. For example, in the East, the Osses tend to view Russia more favorably, while in the West, the Vesis tend to be more distrustful of Russia and more sympathetic to the US. When asked, in terms of cultural mentality and history, are you more attracted to Russia or the US? 25% of the East said Russia, 23% the US, and 46% neither. When asked the same questions in the West, only 7% preferred Russia and 42% the US, while 47% were not attracted to either country. Sensitivities are again divided when asked about the negative content of news about Russia in the mainstream press or about Western sanctions policy. In the East, there is a greater understanding of Moscow's current positions, more criticism of NATO enlargement, and a clear dislike of the warmongering attitude of Berlin's political class towards the conflict in Ukraine. This makes it easier to understand the results of the European elections in the east of the country, with almost 29% of the vote for the AfD, 14% for the debutant BSW, and 5% for Die Linke, the three parties which advocate the resumption of relations with Moscow, the return of Russian energy, and an end to the arms supplies to Zelensky, together make up almost half of the electorate in the territory of the former GDR. If it were a country, it could be said that the EU-NATO system would not find it easy to play its belligerent political game in a new GDR as it does today in the Federal Republic of Germany. Germany's electoral map is currently a huge black spot, CDU-CSU, in the West and Berlin, with small greens and red gaps for SPD, and another large blue spot, AfD, which coincides exactly with the 6 states of the former GDR, with exception of Berlin. Elections will be held in 3 of 6 eastern states in September: Saxony, Thuringia, and Brandenburg. And if results swing towards the AfD and BSW as expected, the new electoral configuration could lead to a new party alliances and open up a completely new political dynamic in Germany. In any case, the East will weigh more heavily, potentially forcing Berlin into a new Ostpolitik and a different approach to both the proxy war in Ukraine and coexistence with Russia.